The lawyer wasn't even sorry. That was the thing I kept coming back to, even hours later. He had walked into my hospital room with an envelope in his hand and an expression like he was late for something more important, set the papers on my bedside table, and said, "Mr. Voss sends his regards," without once meeting my eyes. Mr. Voss sends his regards. 3 years of marriage. 3 years of learning the exact way Cale took his coffee, of memorizing the sound of his breathing in the dark, of pressing my face against his chest and believing, really, truly believing, that a man like Cale Dominic Voss could choose someone like me and mean it. And he sent his regards. My hands were still shaking when I reached for the envelope. I noticed the trembling like it was happening to someone else. Distant. Clinical. My body understanding what my mind was still refusing to catch up to. I pulled out the papers. Petition for bond annulment. Filed by Cale Dominic Voss. Grounds: deception. Manipulation. Breach of bond contract. The words blurred. I blinked hard, once, refusing to cry in front of a man who couldn't even be bothered to look at me. Deception. A sound built in my chest and died before it reached my throat. Because the worst part, the part that made the room tilt sideways, wasn't the word itself. It was that somewhere across the city, Cale had signed these papers. He had sat at his desk, or stood at a window, or maybe hadn't even paused his day at all. He had signed his name and severed our bond. While I was in labor. I hadn't even felt it happen. That was the humiliation I couldn't swallow. Our bond, that warm, steady thread that had lived in my chest for 3 years like a second heartbeat, had been cut, and I had been too consumed by pain and fear and calling his name into a pillow to notice the exact moment it went quiet. I pressed my fist against my sternum. Nothing. Just a hollow ache where he used to be. The lawyer cleared his throat. "If you could review and sign the—" "Get out," I said. He blinked. "Mr. Elian, there are documents that require your—" "Get out." He left. I sat in the white silence of the hospital room and stared at the ceiling and did not cry. I was too empty for crying. Too hollowed out. The fluorescent light hummed above me, indifferent, and somewhere down the hall a newborn was crying, and it wasn't my baby because my baby had been taken from the room before I could hold him. Standard procedure, a nurse had said. Just for observation. But now, in the silence, with divorce papers on my bedside table, I understood that nothing about tonight had been standard. They had planned this. Or he had. Or someone had. I didn't know yet how deep it went. I only knew that I had spent 3 years loving Cale Voss with every exhausting, unguarded piece of myself, and somewhere in those 3 years I had made an enemy of him without knowing it. The grounds written in black ink told me he believed I had deceived him, that our bond had been built on manipulation. He wasn't entirely wrong. That was the secret I had been carrying since the beginning. The thing I had spent 3 years praying he would never discover, because I knew, I had always known, that a man like Cale would not survive the truth with grace. The arrangement had been my family's doing. I had been positioned deliberately to cross his path at a charity gala 2 months before our bonding. There had been people involved. Intentions I hadn't fully understood until it was already too late, until I was already looking at him across a crowded room and feeling my pulse do something it had never done before. But what those papers didn't say, what Cale apparently didn't know, was that I had ended the arrangement the moment I realized what it was. That every day after the first month had been real. That I had loved him without agenda or instruction or anyone pulling strings, loved him so completely it had frightened me, loved him in the helpless, free-fall way that had nothing to do with anyone's plan. He didn't know that part. And now I realized it was too late to tell him. I stood up slowly. My body protested, exhausted, wrung out, held together by adrenaline and nothing else. I moved to the small window and looked out at the city lights below, blurring slightly, and made a decision. I was not going to sign those papers tonight. I was also not going to be here when morning came. Because Cale had sent a lawyer instead of coming himself, which told me everything about his intentions. And if he wasn't coming, if he had already decided, already closed the door, already reduced 3 years to a legal document, then staying meant becoming something convenient for him to discard at his leisure. I had one thing left. My son was somewhere in this hospital. dark-haired and new and completely unaware that his father had already chosen his absence. I was not leaving without him. I reached for my phone with steady hands, steadier than I expected, and sent one message to the only person I trusted with the truth. Jihan, I need to disappear tonight. Both of us. The reply came in under a minute. I know. I've been waiting. I'll be there in an hour. I looked at the annulment papers one last time. Kale's signature at the bottom, clean and decisive, the way he did everything. I left them unsigned on the bedside table. Let him wonder. I told myself I had healed. Every morning I woke up, made coffee, listened to Luca babble at his stuffed rabbit, and told myself that the hollow ache in my chest was getting smaller. That the bond scar had stopped burning. That I had stopped reaching for my phone at 2 a.m. hoping for a message that was never going to come. I was lying, obviously. But I was very good at it by now. Luca was 18 months old and already the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, which was its own specific kind of cruelty. He had my coloring, fair skin, soft features, but everything else belonged to someone I was trying very hard not to think about. Dark eyes that watched the world with quiet intensity. A stubborn jaw that set itself when he didn't get what he wanted. The habit of going completely still when something caught his attention, studying it with a focus that felt too large for such a small person. Every morning I looked at my son and saw Kale. I loved them both so much it felt like an illness. We had built something here. A small apartment in a city where no one knew the Voss name, a routine that kept the worst of the loneliness at bay. I did translation work online. Luca went to a small daycare 3 mornings a week where the teachers called him a little professor because he stared at everything so seriously. We had a park we visited every Thursday. We had a bakery on the corner where the owner always saved us the last of the red bean pastries. It was a quiet life. A careful life. It was nothing like the life I had before, and I was grateful for that, and I hated that I was grateful. And on particularly bad nights I hated myself for building something this small when I had once stood in a Voss estate and thought, foolishly, this is mine now. Jihan called every 2 weeks. Never more, never less. A discipline we had both agreed on, because more felt dangerous and less felt like abandonment. He called on a Tuesday morning while I was feeding Luca breakfast. He's looking again, Jihan said, without greeting. My spoon stopped moving. Luca grabbed it immediately. How close? I asked. My voice came out steadier than I felt. Closer than last time. He hired a private firm 3 months ago. They've been working through your exit trail systematically. The pause. Eli, he's not stopping. My stomach twisted hard. I set the spoon down and turned away from Luca, lowering my voice out of instinct even though my son was 18 months old and entirely unaware. He signed the papers, Jihan. He chose this. I know what he signed. Another pause, heavier this time. I'm just telling you what I see. The man is not behaving like someone who made peace with his decision. I didn't answer. Because what was I supposed to say? That some pathetic, traitorous part of me felt something at that information. Something warm and unwanted that I immediately buried under 18 months of hard-won practicality? That I still dreamed about cedar and cold air and the specific weight of an arm across my waist in the dark? I'll be careful, I said. Eli. I'm always careful. Thank you for telling me. I hung up before he could hear anything in my voice that I didn't want him to hear. Luca held the spoon up toward me like an offering. Thank you, I told him seriously. He looked very pleased with himself. I noticed the first one at the market. A tall figure in a dark coat, standing too still near the vegetable stalls. My omega instincts fired before my brain caught up. Alpha, close, watching, and the hair on the back of my neck rose. I told myself I was being paranoid. I paid for my groceries. I took the long way home. By the time I reached my building there were 2 of them. I recognized the formation. The way they positioned themselves, one near the entrance, one across the street. Professional. Patient. I had grown up around enough security details to know what deliberate placement looked like. My heart was slamming against my ribs. Luca is at daycare, I reminded myself. He's safe. He's not here. I walked through the entrance with my head down and my grip tight on the grocery bag, calculating. If I could get upstairs, if I could call Jihan, If I could figure out how much time I had before. I stepped into the lobby. And stopped. He was standing near the far wall with his arms crossed, dressed in a dark coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent, his jaw set and his eyes fixed on me like I was the only thing in the room. The world lurched sideways. He was bigger than I remembered. Or maybe I had spent 18 months carefully making him smaller in my mind, sanding down the edges of him so I could breathe, and the reality of him was something no amount of distance had actually prepared me for. Dark-eyed and devastatingly familiar, with a tension in his jaw that told me he had been holding himself rigid for a very long time. His scent reached me before I could stop it. Cedar. Cold air. Something underneath that was only ever him. My Bond scar ignited like someone had pressed a lit match to my chest. He looked at me like I was something he had crossed oceans to find. He looked at me like he was furious that he had needed to. Eli, he said. Just my name. Low and rough and wrecked in a way that made my throat close completely. I had exactly one thought. He doesn't know about Luca. And Luca's daycare pickup was in 40 minutes. I had 38 minutes before daycare pickup. That was the only thought keeping me functional as I stood in the lobby with Kale Voss 6 feet away, looking at me like I was something he had torn apart cities to find. My heart was slamming so hard I felt it in my teeth. My grip on the grocery bag was the only thing anchoring me to the ground. You look like you're about to run, Kale said quietly. I'm not running. You've been running for 18 months. The words landed clean and sharp, like he had aimed them. I lifted my chin and met his eyes directly, because the one thing I had promised myself, the one dignity I had left, was that I would never let Kale Voss see me fold. You annulled our bond, I said. While I was in labor. What exactly did you expect me to do? Something moved through his expression. Painful. Gone before I could name it. I expected you to face me, he said. You sent a lawyer, Kale. The name came out before I could stop it, and I watched him react to it. A slight tension through his jaw, his eyes darkening just barely. He had always done that. Reacted to my voice saying his name like it meant something specific only to him. I hated that I still noticed. He crossed the lobby in 4 strides and I stepped back automatically, shoulders meeting the wall, and then he was there. Too close. His height cutting off the light above me, his hands braced on either side of my head, not touching me but close enough that I felt the warmth radiating off his body like standing near a fire. My breath went shallow. This was the thing no amount of distance had cured. The way my body simply responded to him, bone deep and humiliating, like it had never received the message that we were over. I need you to come upstairs, I said. Not here. His eyes searched my face. Why? Because you have 2 men stationed outside my building and people are staring and I am not doing this in a lobby. I held his gaze steadily even though my pulse was absolutely wild. Come upstairs. We'll talk. A beat of silence. Lead the way, he said. The elevator was a mistake. It was small. Kale was not. He stood beside me with his arms crossed and his jaw set, and his scent in the enclosed space was overwhelming. Cedar and cold air and that deep, specific warmth underneath that my Bond scar recognized before my brain could intervene. The scar burned the entire ride up. A steady, pulling ache, like something trying to remember how to reach him. I stared at the floor numbers and thought about Luca. 31 minutes. I had 31 minutes to get Kale in and out of my apartment before I needed to leave for pickup. Or I needed to call the daycare and extend. But that meant Kale potentially still being here when I returned, and that meant, don't think about that. One problem at a time. I unlocked my door and stepped inside and turned around to face him. He had already stopped moving. He was standing in the center of my small living room, and he was looking at things. The child's drawing taped crookedly to the refrigerator, green crayon, chaotic, beautiful. The pair of tiny shoes by the door. The small jacket hanging on the hook beside mine. His expression didn't change. But his breathing did. Eli, he said. Very carefully. Whose? You said you wanted to talk, I interrupted. My voice came out completely level. I was genuinely impressed with myself. So talk. He turned to look at me. The expression on his face was one I had never seen before. Not anger. Not coldness. Something raw and unsteady that he was working very hard to contain. I was wrong, he said. The room tilted. I had spent 18 months preparing for this conversation. I had rehearsed every version of it. His anger, his accusations, his cold efficiency, the devastating politeness he used when he had already made up his mind. I had prepared for all of it. I had not prepared for this. What? I whispered. The evidence I was given. He moved closer, slow and deliberate, and I stayed exactly where I was because my legs had stopped taking instructions. It was manipulated, Eli. The report about the arrangement, about you being placed at the gala, it was real, but the conclusion I drew from it wasn't. His voice was low, controlled, but underneath it was something abraded and raw. You ended the arrangement. I know that now. What came after was real and He stopped. His jaw worked. I chose a lie because it was easier than asking you. My throat was so tight I couldn't speak. I hurt you, he said. Quietly. Finally. Like the words had been sitting in his chest for a very long time and he was only now setting them down. And that was the moment my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Daycare, hi Mr. Elian, just a reminder pickup closes at 4 p.m. today due to staff training. See you soon. My stomach dropped straight through the floor. 20 minutes. I had 20 minutes, and Kale was standing in my living room and my son, Kale's son, was waiting to be picked up, and if I left now Kale would follow, and if I didn't leave Luca would be stranded, and there was no version of this where I walked out of today without everything changing. I locked my phone screen. I need to step out, I said. Kale's eyes narrowed. We're not finished. I know. I just need... My voice almost cracked. I caught it. 20 minutes. Stay here. Please. He studied me for a long moment. That quiet, penetrating attention that had always made me feel like he could see directly through every wall I built. You're hiding something, he said. Not an accusation. Just a fact. 20 minutes, I said again. I grabbed my jacket off the hook, and then froze. Right beside it, impossible to miss, was Luca's small jacket. The one with the little bear ears on the hood that Luca refused to leave home without. I watched Kale's gaze drop to it. Watched him go very, very still. Eli, he said slowly. How old? The question was barely sound. My hand was trembling when I reached for the door. Stay here, I whispered. I walked out before he could ask again. But I already knew, with cold certainty settling into my bones, that when I came back, with Luca on my hip and no more walls left to hide behind, everything was going to be different. My phone buzzed again. Not the daycare this time. A message from Jihan, Eli. Don't go outside. Kale didn't come alone. There's someone else with his team, someone I recognize. Someone from the original arrangement. They're here to make sure Kale never finds out the full truth. The elevator doors opened. I stood there and couldn't move. I called Jihan from the stairwell. He picked up on the first ring. Who is it? I kept my voice barely above a whisper, my back pressed against the cold concrete wall, one hand flat against my sternum like I could physically hold myself together. Who did you recognize? Han Su, Jihan said. He was the one who built the original file on you. The one who fed Kale the manipulated evidence. The pause. Eli, he's not here to reconnect. If he knows Kale found you, he's here to make sure Kale leaves believing the worst version of the story. My chest went cold. He'll poison it again, I said. Before you get the chance to explain anything. Yes. I pressed my eyes shut. 18 months of careful, quiet survival, and it was all about to collapse in the span of one afternoon, not because Kale had found me, but because the same man who had destroyed us the first time was standing outside my building waiting to finish the job. What do I do? Tell Kale first, Jihan said. All of it. Before Han Su gets to him. Another pause, quieter. I know that's the hardest thing I could ask you. To us. It genuinely was. Because telling Kale the full truth meant trusting him with the exact weapon that had already been used to destroy me once. It meant standing in front of the man who had signed annulment papers from a distance and handing him every vulnerable piece of myself and hoping, praying, that this time he chose differently. I'll handle Han Su, Jihan said. Just talk to him, Eli. The call ended. I stood in the stairwell for 10 seconds. Then I called the daycare, arranged a late pickup, and walked back to my apartment door. Kale was exactly where I had left him. Standing in the center of the living room, arms crossed, eyes moving over the space with that quiet, systematic attention. He had found the small framed photo on the shelf while I was gone. I knew because he was standing in front of it. Luca at 6 months old, mid-laugh, dark eyes bright. He heard me come in but didn't turn around immediately. When he did, his face was completely unreadable. "Sit down," I said. "Please. There's something I need to tell you and I need you to listen to all of it before you say anything." A long pause. He sat. I stayed standing because I needed to be able to move, needed the illusion of being able to leave even if I wasn't going to. I folded my arms across my chest and looked at him. Really looked, for the first time since the lobby, and let myself register how tired he looked. The shadows under his eyes. The tension he was carrying in his shoulders like he had been braced against something for a very long time. Part of me wanted to reach for him. I pushed that part down hard. "The arrangement was real," I started. "My family owed a debt to people connected to your father's company. The agreement was that I would attend the gala, cross your path, and allow a natural bond connection to occur if one presented itself." I kept my voice steady. I didn't fully understand what I was agreeing to until I was already there. And then I saw you, and the bond pull happened, and everything moved very fast. Kale said nothing. His eyes never left my face. "I ended the arrangement after the first month," I said. "I contacted the people involved and told them I wouldn't report back anymore. That whatever happened between us was ours and I wasn't going to let it be anyone's strategy." My throat tightened. "I should have told you then. I know that. I was terrified of losing you before you were even really mine, and I made the wrong choice, and I have spent 3 years knowing it was the wrong choice." The silence in the room was enormous. "The son in that photo," Kale said. His voice was very quiet. "He's mine." It wasn't a question. "Yes," I said. Something crossed his face. Devastating and brief. He pressed his hand flat against his mouth for a moment, and I watched him absorb it, watched the information move through him like a physical impact. "His name," he said. "Luca." I hesitated. "Luca Kale Alien." His eyes closed. When he opened them again they were wet, and the sight of it cracked something open in my chest that I had been keeping sealed for 18 months. Because I had imagined this moment, had dreamed it and feared it and buried it, but in none of those versions had I imagined Kale Voss sitting in my small apartment looking like a man discovering the full cost of a decision he couldn't undo. "There's something else," I said. "There's a man downstairs named Han-Soo. He's the one who built the false evidence against me. He's here right now, and he's here to make sure you leave still believing the worst version of everything." I held his gaze. "Whatever he tells you, whatever he's already told your team, I need you to come to me first. I need you to ask me directly before you decide anything." Kale stood up slowly. He crossed the room and stopped in front of me, too close, close enough that his warmth reached me and my bond scar burned immediately in response. His hand rose, slow, deliberate, and his fingers curved against my jaw so gently that my eyes stung. "I'm not leaving," he said. "Certain. Not this time. Kale, I need to deal with Han-Soo." His thumb traced my cheekbone just once. "And then I'm coming back and I'm going to ask you something. And I need you to not make any decisions until I do." My pulse was completely out of control. "What are you going to ask me?" He looked at me for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted, softer than I had ever seen him, and more frightened, and entirely certain all at once. "One chance," he said quietly. "That's all I'm going to ask for." He dropped his hand and turned toward the door. And then his phone rang. He answered it. 2 seconds of listening. And then every trace of softness left his face entirely. "Say that again," he said, his voice dropping to something very cold and very still. He looked at me over his shoulder. "Han-Soo isn't working alone," he said. "Eli, did you know there's a second file? One that was never shown to me." His eyes held mine and the question in them was not accusation. Not yet. But it was close. One with your name on it from after our bonding ceremony? My blood went cold. Because I did know. I had created it. Eli. His voice was very quiet. That specific kind of quiet that meant he was holding something enormous completely still inside himself. Did you know about a second file? My silence was answer enough. I watched his expression shift, not to anger, not immediately. Something more painful than anger. The look of a man recalculating, carefully, everything he thought he had just understood. Tell me, he said. Right now. Before I go downstairs. So I did. After our bonding ceremony, I started. The people behind the original arrangement came back. I had cut contact, I had ended everything, but they came back because the bond had worked and suddenly I had access to things they wanted. My voice was steady. I needed it to be steady. Financial records. Business schedules. Private information about Voss Holdings that they could use. Kale said nothing. His jaw was tight. They threatened to tell you everything if I didn't cooperate, I said. The original arrangement, the gala, all of it. So I created a file. Documentation of every contact they made with me, every demand, every threat. I forced myself to hold his gaze. I built it as protection. If they ever moved against me, I had evidence of coercion. But it had my name on it and it looked, taken out of context, like I had been actively gathering information on you the entire time we were bonded. The silence stretched. Han-Su has that file, I said. And he's going to show it to you without the context. Without the evidence of the threats that came before it. He's going to make it look like I spent 3 years spying on you. Kale crossed the room in 3 strides. I braced, for coldness, for the shuttered expression I remembered from the worst moments of our marriage, for the precise and devastating efficiency of a man closing a door. He stopped directly in front of me and put both hands on my face. Gentle. Completely, disarmingly gentle. Why didn't you tell me? He said. Low and rough and cracked at the edges. When they came back. Why didn't you come to me? My throat closed completely. Because I was terrified, I admitted. The words tasted like the rawest thing I had ever said out loud. You would have found out about the original arrangement. I thought you would look at me the way you looked at me in the hospital, like I was a stranger who had wasted your time, and I couldn't. I stopped. Swallowed. I couldn't survive you looking at me like that while I was still standing in front of you. Something in his expression fractured. Eli, he said. I know it was wrong. I should have trusted you and I didn't, and everything that came after is partly because I made that choice. My hands came up and wrapped around his wrists, not to remove them, just to hold on to something solid. But I need you to know the file was protection, not betrayal. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he pressed his forehead against mine, and I stopped breathing entirely. I'm going to go deal with Han-Su, he said quietly. And I need you to stay here. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone except me or Jihan. Kale. I'm not asking. His thumbs traced my cheekbones, barely a touch. For once, please, just let me handle something. He pulled back. The warmth of his hands left my face and I felt the absence of it immediately, a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. He was almost at the door when I said it. Luca's pickup is in 40 minutes. He turned around. I'll be back in 30, he said. He was back in 25. I heard the knock, 3 quiet raps, the same as before, and opened the door to find him standing in the hallway looking like a man who had just walked through fire and come out the other side still standing. His coat was gone. His collar was open. There was a tension in his frame that was slowly, visibly releasing as his eyes found mine. Han-Su, I asked. Handled. He stepped inside. Jihan helped. The full file, including the evidence of coercion, has been secured. Han-Su won't be a problem anymore. I nodded. My hands were trembling slightly and I pressed them flat against my sides. We need to get Luca, I said. I know. He paused. I want to come. The request was so careful. So completely unlike the Kale who had once moved through the world like it owed him passage. This version stood in my doorway and asked, and the asking undid me more than anything else he could have done. Okay, I said quietly. Luca saw Kale before Kale saw Luca. My son was standing at the daycare gate with his rabbit under his arm when we arrived, and his dark eyes found the tall stranger beside me with immediate, solemn attention. He stared for a full 5 seconds with the focused gravity of a small judge. Then he looked up at me. Who? I crouched down to his level. My heart was hammering so loudly I was certain everyone in the vicinity could hear it. Someone I want you to meet, I said carefully. Is that okay? Luca considered this. He looked at Kale again. Kale had gone completely still. I had seen Kale Voss face down boardrooms, hostile takeovers, and territorial alphas twice his aggression level, and I had never once seen him look the way he looked right now, like he was terrified of a 19-month-old boy with a stuffed rabbit. Luca toddled forward. He stopped at Kale's feet, looked straight up at him with those dark familiar eyes. Then he held out the rabbit. Kale made a sound I had never heard from him before. Barely audible. Wrecked and soft and completely unguarded. He crouched down slowly until he was at Luca's level, and he took the rabbit with both hands like it was something sacred. Thank you, he said. His voice was completely destroyed. Luca studied him seriously. Then, apparently satisfied with whatever verdict he had reached, he leaned forward and grabbed a fistful of Kale's shirt. Kale's eyes found mine over our son's head. And I saw it, clear and undeniable and more frightening than anything Han Su had ever threatened me with. He wasn't going to be able to walk away from this. Neither was I. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. No name. No context. Just 6 words that made the ground disappear beneath my feet. I know what the Bond scar means. I know what the Bond scar means. 6 words. Unknown number. No context. My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles went white. The daycare gate was still open behind us, the afternoon sun still warm, Luca still holding a fistful of Kale's shirt like he had made a decision and intended to stick with it. Everything looked exactly the same as it had 30 seconds ago. But my chest was ice. The Bond scar. Not many people knew what a severed Bond scar meant on an Omega. Most assumed it was just residual marking, cosmetic, fading, irrelevant. But the truth was more complicated and rarer, and if someone out there understood what mine actually indicated. Eli. Kale's voice. I looked up from the phone and found him watching me with that quiet, penetrating focus, Luca still anchored to his shirt. What's wrong? He said. Nothing. The word came out too fast. His eyes dropped to the phone in my hand, then back to my face. Don't, he said softly. Don't do that. Not anymore. The gentleness in his voice was almost worse than accusation. I could defend myself against his anger. I had no idea what to do with his patience. I turned the phone screen toward him. He read it once. His expression didn't change, but something in his eyes went very cold and very focused. The look I remembered from the rare moments Kale identified a real threat. Not reactive. Calculating. Forward it to Jihan, he said. Now. I did. Kale straightened and looked out at the street around us with new attention, scanning, reassessing. His free hand, the one not occupied by our son, moved to my lower back. Instinctive. The touch of someone putting themselves between a person they're protecting and whatever might be coming. My heart did something complicated and painful. We're going back to the apartment, he said quietly. Stay close. Luca fell asleep on the walk back. He was like that, capable of dropping into sleep with the sudden completeness of a phone losing charge. 1 minute he was pointing at pigeons, the next his head was heavy on Kale's shoulder, one small fist still loosely curled in the fabric of his shirt. Kale carried him like he was made of something irreplaceable. I walked beside them and tried not to fall apart at the sight of it. Inside, Kale settled Luca carefully onto the couch cushions while I grabbed a blanket, and we moved around each other in the small living room with the quiet coordination of people who had once known each other's rhythms by heart. I tucked the blanket around Luca's shoulders. Kale stayed crouched beside him for a moment longer than necessary, watching him breathe. When he stood, his eyes found mine immediately. Sit down, he said. Please. We sat on opposite ends of the small sofa with Luca sleeping between us, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The apartment was very quiet. Afternoon light came through the curtains in long warm strips and touched Luca's dark hair and made everything feel unbearably tender. The bond scar, Kale said. Careful. Measured. What does it mean? The real answer. My throat tightened. When a bond is severed by one party while the other is emotionally bonded at full depth, I said slowly, the scar doesn't fade the same way. It stays active. I pressed my hand flat against my sternum without thinking. It means the severed bond was real on my side. Completely real. It's essentially proof that I wasn't performing the bond. That I wasn't faking what I felt. Kale was very still. Someone out there knows that, I said. And they want me to know they know. Or they want you scared, he said. Before you can fully trust me again. One last move to keep us separated. The thought settled between us, cold and clarifying. He was right. Han Su was handled, but he wasn't the only player. Someone else was watching this unfold and was not happy about the direction it was going. Kale, I said, if we do this, if you stay, it won't be quiet. These people don't let go easily. I know. I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago. I'm not going to disappear quietly if something goes wrong between us. I have Luca now and Eli. He said my name quietly and it stopped me completely. I know. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at me with an expression so open it was almost painful to hold eye contact with. I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. I'm not asking you to forget what I did. I know what I cost you. I know I don't walk back in here and have everything repaired because I showed up and said the right things. A breath. I just want the chance to be someone you can trust again. However long that takes. Luca stirred slightly between us. Resettled. His small hand found my knee in his sleep and stayed there. Kale looked down at it. He reached for you in the daycare, I said quietly. He never does that with strangers. He has good instincts. His voice was rough. He has your instincts. Kale looked up at me. And I made a decision. Not with my head. My head had excellent reasons to be cautious, to take time, to build slowly. I made it with the part of me that had pressed my fist against a hollow bond scar in a hospital room and still, somehow, refused to sign those papers. One chance, I said. His breath stopped. Not the bond. Not yet. Just time. You stay. We figure out whoever sent that message. And we see. I held his gaze steadily. But, Kale, if you hurt us again, I won't survive it quietly. I want you to understand that. I understand, he said. I'm counting on it. He reached across Luca and his hand covered mine on the cushion. Warm and careful and asking, always asking now. I turned my hand over. He exhaled like he had been holding his breath for 18 months. Outside, the city moved on. Somewhere out there someone knew our secret and was deciding their next move. There were still threads unraveling, still dangers neither of us could fully see yet. But here, in this small apartment, with my son's hand on my knee and Kale's fingers laced through mine, for the first time in 18 months, I wasn't pretending.